Hello, subscribers! This is a 6-part in my series reviewing the Apocrypha, checking for myself if any of the Apocrypha should actually be canon or not. As a reminder for anyone just tuning in, I will read it for myself and then give my notes as I have them, giving you my first impression as it comes to me. And then after that, I will go do actual research to try and see if there are any arguments out there that actually support either view. Judging by what we've already seen in the past videos, I don't expect much to come out of the research, but you never know. Today's episode, we're focusing on the Epistle of Jeremiah, and after that, Baruch, because Epistle of Jeremiah is only one chapter. Even though it's a really long chapter, they could have made it 73 verses. And right away we can see the ongoing theme in the Apocrypha, that they were all just taken straight from the Septuagint instead of translating them directly from Hebrew, because it's got Jeremiah translated as Jeremy and Nebuchadnezzar translated as that impossible to pronounce name. So this book claims to be a copy of an epistle from Jeremiah to the captives of Israel in Babylon. Only time will tell if there's any credence to that, but if there is, if this really is from Jeremiah, that is a strong reason to consider it canon. Okay, nothing wrong here. It sounds like it might actually be what it says it is. The whole letter is just Jeremiah convincing people that false gods are indeed false. Stuff like, if you have to clean them, they are not gods. If animals have no issue perching on them, they are not gods. Stuff like that. On the one hand, it feels kind of unnecessary in this day and age, at least. Most people don't need to be convinced that false gods are false. They just need to be convinced God is true. On the other hand, you get those statements or questions from atheists who claim that God speaks about other gods as if they were real. With this book in canon, it makes for a pretty good argument against those accusations, though it isn't totally necessary, just convenient. So I'm leaning towards the Epistle of Jeremiah being in canon. So next is Baruch. 5 chapters, I believe. 5 chapters. Alright, let's see where this goes. Okay, so far so good. Baruch is written by this guy whose genealogy I do not know, but within the captivity of Babylon. And so far, just in chapter 1, it's not really saying much, but it does agree with God. He's not one of the people praying God would set them free or whatnot. He is accepting the fact that Israel sinned and that they should serve Nebuchadnezzar as their king while they are in captivity. Here's something. Chapter 2, verse 17. Open thine eyes and behold, for the dead that are in the graves, whose souls are taken from their bodies, will give unto the Lord neither praise nor righteousness. That is the clearest verse of bodies having souls that I have ever seen. In fact, there is an argument out there that some people make that when the Bible says soul, it's speaking of the physical body. But this verse right here clearly teaches substance dualism. Mark a point for canon on this one. Alright, here in Baruch 3, this is another Apocrypha that, I forget the exact word, personalizes wisdom, or personifies wisdom. Though this one is not anywhere near the degree of the other 2 books we've seen this in. But it's still funny how often it happens. It's like anyone who tries to write any sort of wisdom literature has to just try and copy Solomon. But so far, still nothing wrong. I'm getting a little ADD, so it's hard to follow, but I am not blaming the book itself. Okay, chapter 4 does that thing I complained about in earlier books where there isn't quite a clear distinction when the subject changes. For a good chunk of this chapter, it sounds like Jerusalem is speaking to Israel. but then all of a sudden, take a good heart, O Jerusalem. But I guess that's where it changed, and now the narrator's just speaking generally. I do have to say that so far Baruch isn't saying much. Like, there isn't really a whole lot of actual content here. Okay, done with Baruch, and there's not much to say. Best I can say about Baruch is that he's got the right attitude, so it's certainly consistent with Scripture, and it teaches substance dualism. And I don't see any reason why it can't be canon, just from reading it, other than it's really boring. Like, there's nothing here. I feel like even the Epistle of Jeremiah actually said more because it had a much more clear structure to it of what it was trying to communicate. But Baruch is, I guess, just exhortation. Certainly useful for the people who were living in Babylon at the time in captivity, but not so much for the rest of us. I think the biggest thing that could dissuade me from considering both of these books for canon is if they were not written by who they claim to be written by. That is an automatic failure if that's the case. But if they are consistent, and the only arguments I can find are tradition from the Catholics and not in the Hebrew canon from Protestants, then I will probably lean towards canonizing them. It's not like Sirach, where there were problematic verses, so I don't feel like I need to be safe with these. They, as far as I can tell, they feel pretty safe as is to be canon. So now I have to go research and see if anybody has anything to say. I don't expect there to be anything. I do not expect to find anything useful, but we shall see. I'll be back in a moment.
48 hours later.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and I haven't even finished considering what my answer is, because I need to unpack it all. And hopefully I won't forget any points. Like, first of all, before I forget, turns out that the Epistle of Jeremiah is actually Baruch chapter 6, at least in some versions. So it's really funny how that worked out. How the first time I just happened to decide to do two separate books in one video, and they turn out to sometimes be in the same book anyway. And the main contention that will be with these books is, are they written by who they claim to be written by? But also another consideration is, in the Epistle of Jeremiah, is he speaking as a prophet? That, if it is in fact Jeremiah talking, is he speaking on behalf of God? So in verse 1 it says, a copy of an epistle which Jeremiah sent unto them which were to be led captives into Babylon by the king of the Babylonians, to certify them as it was commanded him of God. I don't know what it means by certify. I mean, I can guess based on what's actually said in the book, like to encourage them. But according to this, he was commanded to write this letter by God. But unless I'm forgetting something and I have to read over it again, he doesn't say, thus saith the Lord at any point. So does that still count as speaking as a prophet? Because if it's written by Jeremiah and he's speaking as a prophet, then this absolutely belongs in canon. Even if we don't have the Hebrew, which is the original Hebrew, which is one of the points of contention that is going to be brought up here. So within my studies, I found this 4-hour debate on the topic, which covered a few books, including Baruch. The guy in favor of them being canon, almost ironically, seems to be a King James onlyist. My King James Bibles don't have the Apocrypha in them, so it's somewhat ironic that a King James onlyist would affirm the Apocrypha as canon, but whatever. His name is SoCal, and Turretin Fan, or T-Fan here, is making the claim it's not canon, and let's just hear one of his main contentions, which is similar to it's not found in the Hebrew Bible, but I think a little stronger than that if you accept the premise, which I'll get into in a second.
Baruch is not true or not preserved. The prologue of Sirach 1:1, confesses the book to be a translation into Greek, and readily admits the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And this is kind of one of the main points of this point about preservation. The authoritative text, the authoritative word of God, is of course the original, not some translation. The question of whether or not Sirach 13:13 is actually present in the original, and therefore an authoritative source for doctrine and so forth, well, you need to show us the original. And you can't, because the original is, there's only about 2/3 of the book of Sirach that it still exists in Hebrew, and that means that it hasn't been preserved. It's only been very fragmentarily preserved. And even those cases, there's not many manuscript copies on which to base our conclusion about whether that's the original or not.
So the contention is that God would preserve his word, and in order to call it preserved, it must be in the original language. And this seems like a good point to say that SoCal was not a good debater. He could not challenge these points very well. Even when he did challenge them, he just didn't do it very well. He's a bit of a narcissist. I'll link this debate in the description. You can just watch it yourself and you'll see what I'm talking about. But anyway, the question would be, is it true that in order to call God's word preserved, it must be preserved in the original language? And one of T-Fan's arguments is that things are lost in translation, so yes, it does have to be in the original language. And I kind of want to agree with that, but at the same time, I don't read the original language anyway, so it almost feels a little hollow, but we have to consider is, like, what do I put more weight in? A book written by Jeremiah under his authority as a prophet, or that same book in the original language? Because the argument isn't that the original language was Greek. These books were translated, I think. To be fair, I could end up mixing up some facts about Sirach and Baruch. But if Baruch was originally written in Greek, that solves the problem right there, because then it definitely was not written by Baruch, which, by the way, Baruch was the scribe of Jeremiah, the real Baruch. The person who wrote the book of Baruch is allegedly that same Baruch, but that is what's up for debate here right now. And there is some reason to think it's not the same Baruch, and let's get into that with my next clip, which is the only other clip I've got.
Also didn't hear any response. Now, of course, I was going kind of fast, but we didn't hear any response to the fact that Baruch wasn't written by Baruch. And we didn't hear any response to the problem of Baruch 1:11 and 12, where Balthasar is said to be the son of Nebuchadnezzar, even though that he's not the biological son of Nebuchadnezzar. He's a successor.
Now, when I first heard him make the argument, not here, earlier in the debate, that Belshazzar was not the son of Nebuchadnezzar, I immediately thought he was wrong, because I checked that very thing when I first saw it say Belshazzar while reading Baruch. I thought, wait, isn't that Daniel? And it's both. There's a very subtle difference between their two names. But yes, Belshazzar is related to Nebuchadnezzar. I'll let T-Fan say it.
He may be a grandson, but he's not the son. And that becomes a bigger problem because of the wording of the prayer that's given there in Baruch 1:11 and 12. If you look at that, I can put it on the screen, I think. There, you can see in that prayer, it says, "Pray for the life of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and for the life of Balthasar, his son, that their days may be upon the earth as the days of heaven, and the Lord will give us strength and light in our eyes, and we shall live under the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and under the shadow of Balthasar, his son, and we shall serve them many days and find favor in their sight." Now, it's kind of a weird prayer to be praying already for the king and his successor, especially because there's another king that comes between Nebuchadnezzar and Balthasar, which the author of Baruch probably didn't know about. And in fact, this is one of those reasons that a lot of scholarship will say Baruch is written quite late and couldn't have been written by Baruch. But the reason why Baruch makes this mistake is that it's dependent literarily on Daniel, was written after Daniel, and misunderstood Daniel. Daniel chapter 5 talks about a relationship, a father-son relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and Balthasar.
Okay, so about that kingly lineage, we can actually find that in Jeremiah, which I did not expect to find. I was looking for other reasons, which I will get into in a second. But chapter 52, verse 31, and it came to pass in the 37th year captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, in the 25th day of the month, that evil Merodach, I'm assuming that's a name and not a title, evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of prison. Now, we know from Daniel that Babylon ended with Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the guy who had the writing on the wall, literally. So, this confirms that there was a king in between Nebuchadnezzar and his son Belshazzar, or more likely grandson. But it's not completely impossible that he is just his actual son, and he just had him late in his life. But either way, that does lend support to the fact that Baruch should have known that. If Baruch really was in the captivity, which he might not have been, and I'll get to that in a second, he should have known that there was somebody else in between them. Now, about Baruch being in captivity or not, Jeremiah definitely was not. Jeremiah ended up going to Egypt, and we know he didn't go to Babylon because of chapter 51, verse 59. There it is. The word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Sariah, the son of Neriah, I still have to look at that and make sure that's not Baruch. That shouldn't be another name for Baruch, but son of Neriah sounds an awful lot like Baruch, so I need to double check that. The son of Messiah, when he went with Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign, and this Sariah was a quiet prince. And so Jeremiah wrote in the book all the evil that should come on Babylon, even the words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to Sariah, when thou comest to Babylon, and shalt see and read these words. That does not sound like the Epistle of Jeremiah. It's possible he could have sent both, but it doesn't feel likely. And even if he did, it's sounding more, after reading this, that even if the Epistle of Jeremiah really was written by Jeremiah, that it was not as a prophet. All right, so according to Baruch the son of Neriah, son of Messiah. So that does sound as if it intends that Baruch and Sariah are the same person. I know different names are possible, but the book of Jeremiah does call Baruch Baruch. So it seems unlikely that it would suddenly call him Sariah for no reason. It's also possible they were brothers. I don't know. Well, a quick search claims that no, Baruch and Sariah are not the same person. Baruch ben Neriah was the scribe and friend of the prophet, while Sariah ben Neriah was Baruch's brother. Though I don't know where DuckDuckGo is getting that information. Well, Wikipedia, I assume, which isn't the best source. But I don't think I'm going to find any better. So the question becomes, why would Jeremiah send that scroll with Sariah instead of Baruch, if Baruch was going to be captured? But also, I haven't brought up this idea that keeps being brought up that Baruch is a prophet. I don't see it, but also after reading the entire book of Baruch not that long ago, like maybe it was just yesterday, and I don't remember a word it says. It is completely forgettable. Like the Epistle of Jeremiah, I remember very clearly because there was a very strong theme that it just kept repeating until the end, and it was only one chapter. But Baruch, I don't know. It's just exhortation. It's just encouragement, I guess. I don't even remember. So although I'm not 100% convinced that God has to preserve his word in the original language, I'm also not convinced that that's a bad argument. That seems like it might be very likely that he would, in order to call it preserved, it must be preserved in the original language. That's very likely. But for the Epistle of Jeremiah, I'm also convinced that even if it was Jeremiah, he is not speaking as a prophet. He's just giving some encouragement, which was, at least going by the last few chapters of Jeremiah, not something he often did. At least not when he was saying, "Thus saith the Lord." As for Baruch did get that thing wrong about Nebuchadnezzar's son that he should have known, and he's not a prophet. He's just Jeremiah's scribe, and he's not writing Jeremiah's words here, assuming it really was Baruch. And it seems a little odd that he wouldn't have been given that main prophecy if he was gonna be in Babylon anyway. I hate to play it safe, but I don't see any reason why either of these books need to be or should be in canon. And in fact, with Sirach, I recommended that Sirach should be read, even if it's not canon. But I don't know that I can say the same about these, especially if they weren't written by who they say they're written by. If any work can be guaranteed pseudepigraphal, which means not written by the person they're claimed to be written by, that is probably a book that should be burned. Any book that lies so blatantly just should not exist. Like, just think about AI. AI is great for a lot of things, but if somebody uses it to actually try to convince people, like, say, the president making a speech, if it's not obviously AI, it is terrible and should probably end up in jail time. That's not to say you can't use it to make funny memes like that, but even jokes need to be honest. Fictional writing needs to be honest about the fact that it's fiction. Anyway, what I'm getting at is I'm gonna side with the idea that the Epistle of Jeremiah and Baruch are not canon, mainly because their authorship is in question, and it's not like some anonymous text where the authorship doesn't actually matter. This is a book that claims to be written by people, so the authorship absolutely matters. If it is not written by them, by who they say they are written by, that is a hard line. No. But even if these are truly written by who they claim to be written by, they're not really important. The Jeremiah one gives some context to the idea of how Israel got over its idol worship. You do often hear how they went into Babylon worshiping idols, and when they came out of Babylon, they were sick of worshiping idols. Maybe Jeremiah's letter had some effect on that. I don't know. But I also don't know if it's actually a real letter that they received, and not something written after the fact. But even if he did write it, it was not under his purview as prophet. Well, except that it was allegedly commanded of him by God. But again, he didn't say, "Thus saith the Lord." So I'll recommend reading the Epistle of Jeremiah, if for no other reason than it's just one chapter. And of course, it's not giving false information in the terms of the content, but the fact that Jeremiah wrote this letter may be false. I don't know. So I'm kind of circling the wagon here. This was a lot harder to think through than Sirach was, but at the same time, Sirach felt more like something you should read. But I'm coming on the decision that they are just not canon. Feel free to change my mind, I guess. Step one proved to me that they were written by who they were say they were written by. I don't think that can be actually proven, especially since we don't have the original Hebrew. But next time, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Looks like 31 chapters. Oh, wait, we have 2 prayers of Manasseh? Are they different? I'll find out when I get there. Alright, next time, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. See you then.